Monday.
Yep, the 31st of January. Welcome, everybody, to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. I am your host. I'm here with Zoe, producer.
Hello, everybody.
The big freaking news, really, besides the fact that it's the fifth Monday, so we have a guest, which I'm very excited about. But the real big astrology news of the day is this new moon in Aquarius. And truthfully, I'm more excited about this new moon, not because of the lunar cycle ahead, but because it says that the lunar cycle behind us is done. January was brutal, kids, with both Venus and Mercury retrograde at the same time. And so that as we set intentions for the new cycle ahead, which we do immediately today, the new moon is today, the 31st of January, tonight, in fact, 9:45 p.m. Pacific time this Monday. Venus has just gone direct, so we're done with that. The emotional body is no longer turned within, while Mercury is stationed, meaning he's backward moving and not appearing to be, flowing in his movement. And he turns around in just a couple of days on the 3rd. We're really out of the woods of what January brought us with the double retrograde cycle happening at the same time. So I'm just so grateful that we get to set intentions right now in the Aquarius consciousness that set us up for the next 4 weeks of what we're going to be intending on and focusing. And we get to say goodbye to January and the process that we've just been through. Now, both Venus and Mercury have to wrap up, right? We're in the 3rd act of their retrograde process. Venus, we're already in that. And for the next month, the entire month, we're going to be revisiting some of the emotional processes and intimacy experiences that came up in January. And the same will be true for Mercury and negotiations, conversations, and things that were difficult or bumpy now and in the last, say, week and a half. By the time we get past Thursday of this week, we're in that wrap up. So I just love being able to say we're kind of at least out of the deepest of those personal challenges of mind and heart. And now we get to set intentions about movement ahead. It's the Aquarius mansion, which means we're in consideration primarily, how do we serve the community? Secondarily, I would say we're in the consciousness of what's our unique contribution that's unlike anyone else's. Aquarius invented nonconformity, the idea that each of us have a unique hero's journey to go on. And when we do that, when we understand who we are, go on that hero journey to find what our gifts and talents are, Aquarius demands that we then turn towards the community to take what we have found and say, here's my contribution. Here's how I serve the world. That's what I want you to be thinking about in the new moon that's coming up tonight. Or if you hearing this podcast after Monday, we're still in that intention setting mode for the first half of this week. Don't be afraid of the hard work and the difficulty that might be part of what you intend at this time. The new moon is right next to Saturn, the teacher. So this one counts. It's like the teacher's on your shoulder saying, are you ready to step up? Actually, he's not saying, are you ready? He's saying, you're ready to step up, now step up, right? That's my interpretation of Saturn being part of this new moon moment. And the last thing I'll just say about this powerful intention setting is that Pluto and the retrograding Mercury are hanging out, which means we're still in a deep access to our unconscious material, the ideas that we have of who we are and how we want our lives to unfold that don't just include what you're aware of, but what's underneath the surface of your consciousness, ready to sort of emerge in new trajectories, new projects, new ideas. We still might be delayed a little bit by the retrograde processes, but Pluto and Mercury together want us to go deep, deep, deep within ourselves to say, what am I willing to die for? And can I turn that into an intention to find my unique gifts and then serve the community with them? So the beginning of the week has this energetic thrust from the new moon. And then from Thursday on, we're actually in some interesting territory that could be a little bit challenging, but there are lessons to be learned. First, it starts with Thursday. That's the day that Mercury turns around. We can put that retrograde cycle in our rearview mirror. But the very next day, the Sun and Saturn are coming into their yearly conjunction. Sun is our conscious awareness, and Saturn is about the journey of learning, growing, facing our responsibilities, doing the karmic work of handling our past so we can move more powerfully forward. This is an amazing moment when our conscious awareness hits the lessons that we're learning. It can be a difficult moment Saturn-wise, so there might be delays or breakdowns of things that you wish would not be delayed or broken down, but it's an important moment for transparently seeing what is so in your landscape about what might need your attention that's sort of deeper, meaning your karmic lessons need your attention. The Sun and Saturn will illuminate that for you. Just after that Sun-Saturn conjunction on Saturday and Sunday, Mars, the planet of action and decision-making, who's now in Capricorn, right, getting ready to connect with Pluto in a few weeks and help us embody what we've been learning. Mercury retrograde in Capricorn, Venus retrograde in Capricorn has been rewiring our thinking and our emotionality in this mansion. Mars, the planet of embodiment coming into this territory, is going to help us put what we've learned into action, into decisions, into a sense of we are now embodying what we learned in that rough month of January. So with Mars in a productive angle with Jupiter, which is the abundance planet, we are going to move through this Saturn moment this weekend with a sense of what's expansively possible. Mars and Jupiter together is like we can have the world and we can have it delivered if we do the work. And then Mars squaring Chiron is like an embodiment bumping up against what are the wounds that you've recently been healing that allow you to move forward. Like Saturn in the house will help us be aware of any problems or challenges we still have to work with. And this little Mars Chiron square will also allow us, from a perspective of embodying what we know and what we've learned, will help us put into our bodies what we've learned in our hearts and our minds in the last month. Overall, I'd say it's going to be a fascinating and important week, not nearly as bumpy as the month of January was, but we start getting hints about what we've recently learned and how we can put our new wisdom into action. Have at it.
So today is the last day of January. You've heard so much about it. We've been talking about it all January, pre-January. But if you're listening to this today on Monday, the 31st, it's your last day to purchase and download the year's astrology overview. Michael goes over what is 2022, what's going to happen, and he dives in deep because it's a 2-hour webinar. So if you're hearing this today on Monday, go ahead and head over to michaellennox.com for your last chance to get the year overview. Michael.
Yes.
I am very excited. We're here at episode 27.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have come on this journey from episode 1 to 10 all the way to here. And we have our first offering for our listeners.
I love this, though.
A lot of you listening to this podcast are into dreams and dream interpretation. And if you found Michael through social media and not necessarily through his website, you might not know that he has 3 books on dream interpretations.
Yeah, dreams were my first love. Long before astrology, I fell in love with dreams.
If you're interested in purchasing any one of these books, we have a special offer for you.
Yes, very excited. My publisher, Llewellyn Worldwide Publishing, which, by the way, was the first new age, new thought publishing in the world about 110 years ago. They're my publisher. All 3 of my books have been published by Llewellyn, and they have made us a generous offer.
Yes, and Llewellyn has offered us a wonderful coupon. So, exclusively for Conscious Embodiment listeners, when you purchase any book at llewellyn.com, you can use the code Lennox20 during checkout and receive 20% off on your purchase. That code is LENNOX20, and that will get you 20% off on llewellyn.com.
How do you spell Llewellyn.com?
So that's www.llewellyn.com. And that is 20% off with the code Lennox20.
Thank you, Llewellyn. Now, also, it is the first week in February, starting Tuesday, which means it's Global Healing Meditation Week. This Thursday, February 3rd, 7 p.m. in my Zoom space, I will talk all about the astrology of February, and then together we'll dive in and do a little meditation. Join me Thursday night at 7.
And you can find that information in the blog articles, which are at the bottom of the homepage. That's michaellennox.com. You scroll to the bottom, and you can see all of Michael's blog posts. For those of you on our mailing list, you don't have to go to the website and do all the scrolling. The information will be sent right to your email, as well as the recording afterwards.
So join the mailing list. If you're not on my mailing list, kids, and you're listening to this podcast, there's something off. Go to michaellennox.com, join the mailing list so you get all of our announcements in a timely manner. I love the 5th Monday weeks. It's something that Zoe and I, when we first started, talking about how we would structure the podcast, I just love that we were going to have this opportunity to occasionally introduce you guys to people who are important in my world, in my perspective. And I've been waiting for this interview since before we started producing this podcast because, kids, I'm exposing to you an extraordinary human being who has written one of the most powerful books I have ever read. And as a person who is subject to hyperbole, I have to qualify that I mean it. And she was my best friend in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, which is just such an exciting way that the world sort of turns and surprises us. I want to introduce my audience to Dr. Lise Deguire. Hey, Lise, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Michael. I'm so happy to be here.
Very exciting. So I'm just going to dive right in because you have, besides being a psychologist and somebody who has spent their lives helping people with their, inner experience, you also have an extraordinary life story that you have turned into a memoir, Flashback Girl, which I would love to invite you right now to tell the essential story that is the nugget of both your life and this stunning memoir.
So, Flashback Girl begins only a couple years before we met, Michael.
Right. That's right.
When I was 4 years old, going on vacation with my family to New Hampshire, and it was our first night of vacation, and my mother decided it was time to cook dinner. So she took something that she thought was lighter fluid and poured it on the coals and did this with me standing right beside her. She went to start the coals into a fire they didn't light. She took this can of something she thought was lighter fluid, but was a highly flammable household solvent, poured them back on the coals, and at this point they exploded all over me and my mother.
Mm.
And in that moment of horror, both of us on fire, my mother made the choice. Given who she was, my mother made the choice. And she ran through this fire into the lake to save herself and left me in the fire. And that's kind of the crucible with which Flashback Girl starts, is this moment of being abandoned and on fire. And then it follows my journey. From that moment, I was left, 65% burned, 3rd degree. I didn't have a lip. I didn't have a chin. I didn't have a neck. My arms were fused to my body, and I was really hideously disfigured. And so the book follows my journey through physical recovery and emotional recovery and social recovery, the journey as a disfigured person.
Yeah.
The friends I made along the way. Michael makes a guest appearance. And my journey living with my family, who had many, many deep and pretty profound limitations.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I would go so far as to say you could have written a memoir about your family without the burn story.
Yeah.
And it would have been a compelling tale of challenging parents with narcissistic wounds doing their best to raise children, but damaging them terribly along the way.
Yeah. And in fact, at the point at which I started to write the book was the point at which my entire family was dead. And some of them had been dead for decades, and some of them had just died.
And that really was key, wasn't it, to you being able and ready to tell the story?
Yeah, because I was not about to put my memoir out in the world while my mother was still alive.
Yeah, yeah.
Not that I think the memoir is necessarily unkind to her, but it is truthful.
Enough said. Read the book, kids. She ain't kidding.
There you go. Yeah.
And I think that's actually something that struck me, too, about the voice that you have in this memoir, is your ability to be truthful and specific about who your mother was without the guile that comes when the forgiveness work hasn't been done.
Right.
How did you do that? How did you get enough forgiveness in your heart to tell the story without attack?
It's so interesting you asked that question, because I have had at least one person say to me that they didn't think my book contained enough forgiveness.
Okay.
I guess it all depends on how you define forgiveness.
Yeah.
For me, forgiveness is not necessarily being in relationship with somebody. You hear stories about people, I don't know, forgiving someone who killed somebody in their family, which I guess, means you can understand how that happened. You can relate to the person's life story, but that doesn't mean you're going to have Thanksgiving with them.
Yes, that's right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So for me, I understand my mother. I appreciate her many gifts and talents. I understand how she came to have the limitations that she had.
Yeah.
And I see her through the grace of that. But that doesn't mean that I also don't see her many mistakes and flaws.
Yeah.
To me, that's forgiveness, but maybe to somebody else it isn't.
One of the things that happened when my mother passed, which is not that long ago, about 2.5 years ago, she passed. I had been terrified as a younger man that when she died, I would be grief-stricken because there was so much unforgiveness and complication. But it happened that the forgiveness in my heart allowed me to let her pass without doing anything unfinished. And I had that experience of identification with you. Reading your words, at least to me, I identified that there was plenty of forgiveness for me as a reader, because it just felt that way in my bones as I read your words. And I understood what it felt like to have a wounding, narcissistic, crazy mother and come to the other side to tell the tale.
Yeah. I mean, my last time that I saw my mother, and I knew that this time would be the last time that I saw her before she died. For reasons, I'm just going to plant that out there and let the reader find how come I knew that.
Read the book, guys. Read the book, because it's an extraordinary story.
But I knew it. I was very clear we both were that this was the last time we would be seeing each other.
Yeah.
And I came prepared with the list, which I read to her, thanking her for all the things that she had done for me that I knew were positive.
Yeah.
So in my mind, again, that is forgiveness. I'm seeing you through the grace of what you were able to offer me. And in our last meeting together, I'm not going to bring up all the other stuff that also happened, you know?
Yeah. That's forgiveness.
So that we could part with as much grace as possible.
I love that. With as much grace as possible, which takes away the expectation that it has to look a certain way.
And this is, I'm sure you hear this all the time, and I do too in my practice. I mean, there are so many people who are parented by people who have left really deep wounds. And I think my story might be a little bit more dramatic, I know but I don't think it's as unusual as we might imagine it to be.
What I experienced reading your book was, yes, the story is absolutely unusual. In fact, one thing that, and you've hinted at this and I'll hint again, you haven't heard nothing, kids. 65% burned about the body and a death of mother that was planned and known about in advance. There are so many aspects of this story that will blow your fucking mind when you read it.
Yeah.
Which is part of the enjoyment of the memoir, honey. It's not that interesting to read a dull story, but fascinating stories are great to read. But what's absolutely true is the universal principles. Oh, I'm getting a little emotional saying it's the universal principle of trying to forge, to find love when love was couched in all of that narcissistic wound. And then we, as the progeny of the damaged, have to find our way in that,
Right.
which you have done sort of beautifully. I'm kind of thinking about the fact that the three of us who knew each other the best in those years were all raised by crazy mothers.
Yes.
We find each other.
Right. And I mean, you were my first blessing of the universe. I mean, and I feel really emotional seeing that to you because you were my first blessing that showed up for me of like, I get you. And we don't have words for it.
No, but we had the experience that lifted that up. Energetically,
Emotionally, artistically, I get you.
Right.
Now we have words for it. Then we just played.
We just played. In fact, I'll just say, this is not about me, but I'll share with the audience that the power of my friendship with Lise was that my desires to be creative and expressive and to be fluid and to be a little bit genderless and to put on girls' clothing and play with makeup was something that we did because it was playful. Meanwhile, Mom was, horrified and trying to put, limits on that. But we did that for each other. And I'm sure Toby, our third friend, whose mother turned out to be schizophrenic and also deeply, deeply challenged. I'm curious, though, about your journey, Lise, from that idea that you naturally came in connection with other people on a similar journey. And then as an adult, you leaned towards a career of helping others by becoming a psychologist. How did that rise up for you? When and how did you know that that was the calling to pursue?
Yeah. And again, I think this is another way in which we have gone on a similar path. For me, it was always this back and forth between wanting to be artistic, interested in the arts, wanting to do that for a living, and then also the part of me that really wanted to connect with people and help them. And connecting people and helping them seemed to be a much more solid career path than some of the artistic stuff that I was interested in. And I'm very glad that I went that way because I think one of the good things about having suffered greatly in like numerous ways is that I can sit with anybody going through anything. I have something to connect with them.
Yeah.
Whether I say that or not, I
You have that lived experience.
Yes, exactly so.
let's talk about pretty,
Mm.
because that's a thing. Now, I will just say, as the person sitting across the room from you, if you meet Lise, it might not be readily apparent that something's off until you look a little bit longer. And then you're like, oh, something is different about this face, but I don't know what it is. Now, when I met you at 5 and 6 years old, it was a very different story. In fact, I love to tell this story. My mother told me that when you love somebody, their scars will disappear, which I took literally. So I kept looking at your face, waiting for your scars to disappear through the principle of love. It's actually a beautiful perspective she offered.
It is.
But I know there's an incredible journey around you being inside of a face that has a traditional sense of attractiveness based on bone structure and just your looks, and what it was like to be disfigured in your face. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah. And again, I don't know. There's something about talking with you about it that's different from anybody else. It makes me feel so much. I'll start by saying that I look a whole lot better than I used to, from having 60 or 70 now. I don't know, surgeries and procedures and laser treatments and all kinds of things that I have had and gone through and been reconstructed. So however, and I'm wearing makeup and all this. So however good I might look, I did not start off looking this way. And underneath, all this, I am plenty scarred. And it's not easy being a scarred person. And it's definitely not easy being a scarred woman.
Yep.
And it was really not easy being a very disfigured child back when we grew up in a neighborhood that was kind of rough. And there wasn't even really a word for bullying, let alone would anybody do anything to help you if you were bullied. They used to say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Yeah, what horseshit?
They're like, and good luck. That's kind of how I made my way.
Yeah.
I think my best armament was a good personality. And, I was friendly and cheerful and nice. And once people got to know me, they didn't want to bully me anymore, because I think it just probably made you feel like an asshole to be somebody who's so nice. But, finding love was a real challenge. I mean, romantic love. I did eventually.
You did?
Yeah, twice, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
It has not been easy. So that's been my journey. It's very painful. And the people who were drawn to me, generally speaking, were also people who were on some kind of painful journey of their own.
Yeah.
I may not have understood that. They may not have either. But when I look back at all the people I was close to, they've turned into artists. They've turned into healers. Many of them are LGBTQ. Many of us came from like really ill families, or like all of the above. So those are the people who loved me when sometimes other people couldn't see who I was.
Beautiful. And you did find love. You've been married twice, and you have 2 extraordinary daughters.
Yes, I did.
Who, by the way, are both extremely attractive.
Yeah.
What was that experience of raising a girl to be a woman and having your own experience of what it's like to be under the gaze, whether it's the male gaze or the world gaze? What was that like? What interesting things can you tell us about perceiving how you're letting, daughters move out into the world and preparing them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will say, like, on some little bit narcissistic level, it was gratifying to have 2 gorgeous daughters, sort of like me saying, like, look, that's my gene pool.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't look like that. So, there's a little bit of that. I certainly have taken great pleasure in how lovely they are. But, I think knowing what I know about how loveliness is, it's all that, but it's really not.
Right.
I worked very hard to raise them to be outspoken and have opinions and not be afraid to share them and not be going with the pretty face thing, because that only
Yep.
gets you so far and it's very shallow.
Right. And they have pretty faces, which means they don't need to work on that muscle.
Right.
Right? That's an added, that's icing. The cake is transparency, honesty, consideration, empathy, compassion, blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
Okay. Talk a little bit about just the idea of now's the time to start the book. Like, how did that happen?
So I have wanted to write this book for like decades. I've read a lot of memoirs. I love memoirs. I always think they're really interesting. And I kept reading them. And I all the time, Michael, I'm like, my story is more incredible than
that. Which it is. True story.
But almost all the time, I'd be like, yeah, you think that's a story. So I waited, though, because as I think I mentioned before, I didn't want to write it until my family was all gone. And so 3 weeks after my mother died, I sat down and I started writing. And I wrote for a year. I mean, I got up and I worked and I did the things I have to do, but I was obsessed. And it just poured out. And I've never written a book before. So the fact that it poured out and was actually like really good was somewhat shocking. But also, I think that's kind of what happens if you've been holding something close to you for a long time and thinking about it and working with it and, healing and all the things you have to do. It came out kind of like a gem, honestly.
So you didn't really know what a great writer you were.
I had no idea.
Well, let me say this also to listening audience. I am an avid reader. Memoir is one of my favorite genres. And this memoir is as good a memoir as I've ever read by a memoirist. And it's a compelling story. And it's incredibly inspiring through the principles of resilience. So
thank you for that. I remember, you may not remember this, but at some point I called you up because I wanted to include the little bit in the book that was about you. And I wanted to know if you wanted me to use your name or not.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, let me read it to you. And I started to read and I read a paragraph and you interrupted me and you said, oh, thank God you can write.
I don't remember that, but that's so something I would say.
I'm sure you were relieved that it wasn't horrible.
Well, the truth is that happens all the time. I can't tell me how any friends are like, I wrote a memoir, I'll read it. And it's like, oh, fuck, what am I going to say about this?
I know, I have that.
Right. So let's just wrap up our conversation, though, about what the experience has been about the book itself. Now that it's out, there's been a lot of notice and movement. You did choose to self-publish because everybody turned you down. And the feedback was, great book, great memoir. Nobody knows who you are, so we're not going to publish you.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the journey of the last year and a half or so.
So, I was rejected by, I think, 30 publishers now.
Love that.
They all said, we love your writing, we love your book, but nobody knows you. You have no platform. And I'm like, what's a platform? So that tells you how little a platform I had. They were right. But I self-published and, it's done pretty well. It's won 3 awards. It won a Nautilus Book Award Gold for memoir. So, and a couple of other ones as well. And that's been very helpful because that gives it kind of that stamp of quality that I think otherwise without a publisher.
Yeah, you just don't have.
Wonder a bit.
Yeah, it's undeniable if the book is carrying at this moment 3 awards, more to come, I'm guessing.
Okay.
And I, as have said to you, Lise, personally, and what I'll say to my audience here is I am committed that everybody who knows who I am reads this book.
Aww.
Where can people find it?
So they can find it, first of all, on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com. You can go to your local indie bookstore. They can order it there if you want to support your indie bookstore, which I hope that you do. If you go to my website, there's links, again, to all 3 of those things.
What's your website address?
It's lisedeguire.com. Of course, that's complicated. So it's LiseDeguire. Or if you Googled Flashback Girl author.
Yeah, you'll find it. It's around. One last thing. I hate these. I do this interviewing shit all the time. And it's always at the end, they say, what's the thing you want to tell us about resilience?
That resilience is a mindset and we can get better at it. I think a lot of people think either I'm resilient or I'm not. That's not true. Maybe you're not resilient right now, but you can learn to be. There's a lot of skills that go into the resilient mindset, but every single one of them is something that you can work on.
Beautiful, beautiful, and inspiring. Lise, thank you so much. I love you madly.
I love you too, Michael.
All right, kids. Flashback Girl. Lessons on Resilience from a Burn Survivor. That's the subtitle. Get it, read it, and have at it.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.